let me take you on a mysterious journey to one of the strangest, most talked about incidents in American history, an event known as the Battle of Los Angeles. But here's the thing. It wasn't a battle against another country. It was a battle against something unknown. In the early hours of February 25th, 1942, the city of Los Angeles, the city that never sleeps, suddenly felt like it had lost its soul. The streets were completely empty. House lights switched off. A strange stillness wrapped itself around the city, but behind that quiet was a growing tension, a fear you could almost feel in the air. And then, the wail of air raid sirens shattered the silence. Moments later, the entire city was plunged into darkness. People rushed out of their homes, panic written all over their faces, eyes glued to the night sky. And that's when they saw it. A scene that looked like it had been ripped straight out of a war movie. The skies above Los Angeles were lit up with a storm of anti-aircraft fire. Giant searchlights sliced through the darkness, turning night into day. It was as if war had suddenly dropped out of the heavens. For a full hour, the gunfire didn't stop. Relentless, chaotic, shells exploding into the sky. And yet, no one could actually see what they were shooting at. No planes, no bombs, nothing clear in sight. Even stranger, all the fire was coming from one side, from the U.S. military, blasting into the sky, with no return fire from the other side, if there even was another side. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence returned. But the city would never be the same again. The next morning, America woke up to baffling headlines and conflicting statements from top officials. Questions began swirling, and they've never really stopped. As time went on, that night became one of the greatest mysteries of World War II, especially since the United States had only just stepped into the war. Was it a real attack? Were there actual enemy aircraft? Or was it something else entirely? Something no one has been able to explain to this very day. Now listen closely, for the details make the story. Let's rewind a bit. Back to the morning of December 7th, 1941, the day that changed everything. That morning at the U.S. naval base of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, it was business as usual. The soldiers were going about their routines. The sky was clear. Everything felt calm. But then, out of nowhere, Japanese warplanes came screaming down in a sudden, devastating attack. Bombs rained from the sky. Explosions tore through the base. One by one, American ships went up in flames. At the time, Japan was chasing a dream: to expand its influence and build a massive empire that could dominate the world. But to do that, they needed resources. And oil was at the top of the list. Japan imported about 94% of its oil, so finding a new supply wasn't just important, it was critical. When Japan went to war with China in 1937, its oil consumption skyrocketed. Then, in 1941, Japan occupied French Indochina, and that's when the United States hit back, freezing Japanese assets and cutting off their access to American oil. It was like tightening a noose around Japan's neck. But instead of backing down, they decided to take what they needed by force. The plan? A lightning-fast air assault on the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The result? Catastrophic losses and a military humiliation that shook America to its core. The very next day, December 8, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before Congress and declared war on Japan. Just like that, America stepped into World War II, and the American people stepped into a new reality. fear became part of everyday life. A nation used to comfort and peace now lived under the shadow of war and the threat of sudden attack. With reports of Japanese submarines patrolling the Pacific, every coastal city, from Alaska all the way down to San Diego, turned into a fortified military zone, ready for anything. During this tense time, U.S. Secretary of War Henry Stimson issued a blunt warning. American cities must be ready for any sudden attack from the enemy. And within just weeks, life on the West Coast changed completely. Security measures tightened, anti-aircraft guns lined the shores, civilians practiced air raid drills until they became routine. Los Angeles, in particular, turned into something close to a military camp. Lights went out at night, curtains stayed shut. Darkness became a nightly ritual. Even lighting a cigarette outside was banned. That tiny glow could give away your position to the enemy. Before long, newspapers gave L.A. a chilling new nickname, the City of Darkness. In that charged atmosphere, full of fear, tension, and constant anticipation, it took only a single strange sound, or the faintest flash in the sky, to send hearts racing. In the middle of all this tension, the rumors started spreading like wildfire. People were whispering about Japanese spies living among civilians, about secret plans for a direct attack on the U.S. West Coast. Fear was growing, turning from simple anxiety into full-blown obsession over an imminent threat. And as the panic escalated, the U.S. government made a shocking move. They rounded up every American of Japanese descent and sent them to special camps, claiming it was for national security until the situation became clearer. But instead of calming things down, that decision only made the crisis worse. And it triggered a reaction from the Japanese that no one in America saw coming. What most everyday Americans didn't know at the time was that Japanese submarines were already patrolling dangerously close to the West Coast. Every so often, one of them would suddenly surface, attack an American ship or two, and then vanish back into the deep. Then, on February 23, 1942, the Japanese delivered a chilling message: America's coastline is no longer safe. That evening, the Japanese submarine A-17 surfaced just off Santa Barbara, so close it went completely undetected. At exactly 7:15 p.m., it opened fire on the Elwood oil field, blasting away for nearly 20 minutes. More than 15 shells slammed into the piers and nearby facilities, sending shockwaves of fear through the area. Physically, the damage was minor. No one was hurt, but the psychological impact was huge. The attack dredged up old fears from World War I and reminded Americans that the Japanese could reach any point along their coastline. The very next evening, February 24th, at 7 p.m., the U.S. Navy intelligence issued an official warning. There was a high probability of an enemy attack within the next 10 hours. That announcement put Southern California on yellow alert, meaning an unidentified aircraft was approaching, and everyone had to be at maximum readiness. But what happened next was nothing anyone could have predicted. As the city braced for a Japanese air raid, orders came down to shut off all power in Los Angeles. The blackout was immediate. People followed the order without question. They'd gotten used to living under blackout rules by now. Everyone understood. This was a real emergency. The city stayed dark until 1:44 a.m. on February 25th, when 3 different radar stations picked up something. A strange object closing in on Los Angeles. Within minutes, the alert status jumped to green, the highest level, meaning an attack was now imminent, and all forces should be fully prepared. Soldiers rushed to their positions, Anti-aircraft crews readied their guns. The tension in the air was electric. 25 minutes later, the radar confirmed it. The unidentified object was now just 3 miles from the city. Air raid sirens screamed through the night. Everyone prepared for what they thought was going to be a devastating airstrike. But then, the shocker. The object vanished from the radar screens. Gone. Just gone. Command centers froze in confusion. No trace, no signal. It was as if the thing had never existed at all. And yet, reports kept pouring in. Civilian spotters, military observers, all claiming to see strange flying objects moving silently across the night sky. The sightings were coming from multiple locations, at the exact same time. Now the military was faced with a decision they'd never encountered before. Do they ignore the radar and trust the eyewitnesses? Do they start shooting at targets they can't confirm? Or do they wait until something clear shows up on the screens again? In that tense, razor-edge moment, the choice they made would turn that night into one of the most mysterious events in America's military history. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the Coastal Defense Battalion got a direct order: open fire. And just like that, the skies over Los Angeles exploded into chaos. The thunder of anti-aircraft guns shook the city. Flashes lit up the night. Thick smoke rolled through the air as terrified residents watched in disbelief. In just minutes, over 1,400 anti-aircraft shells were fired, wildly, in every direction. Shrapnel began raining down on the streets like a storm of steel. Massive searchlights swept across the sky, desperately hunting for a clear target. But the question remained: who was the enemy? And where were they exactly? The strange thing was, there wasn't just one target. Every military unit seemed to be seeing something different. Some swore they saw enemy planes appearing and vanishing in the bursts of tracer fire. Others claimed there was only a single object. A few even insisted they saw an entire squadron, nearly 200 aircraft, flying overhead. But inside the military itself, the reports were all over the place. Some soldiers said there was absolutely nothing in the sky. Those who claimed they did see something couldn't even agree on what it looked like. Some described it as metal birds. Others said it looked more like balloons or blimps. Bottom line, everyone was firing, but nobody was really sure what they were firing at. The confusion only added to the tension at military command. Descriptions of the objects, their shape, size, speed, altitude, were completely inconsistent. One report claimed there was a strange craft moving along the Santa Monica coastline, slowly making its way south toward Long Beach. It was flying so slowly, they said, it took half an hour to cover just 25 miles. And yet, despite all the firepower, it wasn't hit even once. Another unit flat out disagreed, saying they did hit it, and watched it burst into flames right before their eyes. So who was telling the truth? Nobody knew. The facts were buried somewhere under the smoke and confusion. At 4:15 a.m., the military finally gave the order to cease fire. The sky, moments earlier blazing with explosions, began to fall silent. But the tension didn't lift until 7:30 a.m., when the authorities announced the all clear. During those few hours, newspapers scrambled to piece together the story. Initial reports claimed the U.S. military had shot down enemy planes southwest of Los Angeles, based on the testimony of an officer who said he personally saw 2 aircraft explode and fall from the sky. But when daylight came and people went out to see the aftermath, all they found were jagged chunks of shrapnel, American shrapnel, from our own guns. A few homes and cars were damaged by falling debris. but there were no wrecks of enemy planes, no bombs, nothing. As for casualties, it turned out there were no enemy-related deaths at all. Yes, 5 civilians were killed during the chaos, but not by an attack. 3 died in traffic accidents during the confusion in the streets. 2 others suffered fatal heart attacks from sheer terror. And then came the biggest twist: the conflicting statements from top U.S. officials. The very next day, Secretary of the Navy Franklin Knox held a press conference in Washington and said, "What happened was nothing more than a false alarm. No planes, no attack, nothing. The whole thing was triggered by overreacting to earlier events." But Henry Stimson, the Secretary of War, told a completely different story. There were at least 15 unidentified aircraft over the city during the barrage. The contradiction set off a storm of speculation. The military tried to calm the public, promising they were doing everything possible to uncover the truth. But now, one question was echoing louder than ever. If there was no attack, then what exactly was flying over Los Angeles that night? Despite all the chaos and fear that gripped Los Angeles on the night of February 25th, the world's attention was still locked on World War II. And that meant this bizarre night pretty much slipped under the radar. The newspapers gave it a quick, surface-level write-up. People didn't ask too many questions. But once the war ended, the spotlight swung back to that strange event. New documents and witness statements came to light, showing that the U.S. military had launched a secret investigation at the time, interviewing both soldiers and civilians who had been there. And the findings were surprising. One of the biggest revelations. When the guns opened up that night, the artillery crews weren't even sure there was really a target in the sky. It all started when a red flare was spotted hanging over Santa Monica, possibly tethered to a weather balloon. Almost instantly, scattered units began firing at it, and that's when the wild, conflicting reports started rolling in. Some units swore they had shot down airborne objects. Others insisted there was nothing in the air at all. Then, about a month later, March 22, 1942, an official document claimed the barrage had been triggered by sightings of between 1 and 5 unidentified aircraft, likely belonging to Imperial Japan. But the real shocker came after the war ended. When the Japanese government publicly stated, "We had nothing to do with what happened in Los Angeles that night. We sent no planes. We planned no attack." That single statement blew a hole through every official U.S. military explanation linking the incident to a Japanese assault. In 1948, a new theory emerged from a former Air Force major turned college professor named William Goss. After getting full access to the military's classified files, he published a detailed analysis and concluded that the whole thing had been nothing more than a catastrophic misunderstanding caused by weather balloons. And the evidence for the balloon theory was pretty strong. At least 3 officers reported that the object being fired at was, in fact, a balloon. One of them even refused to follow the order to fire, after hearing that a weather balloon had been launched literally 1 minute before the chaos began. His statement was backed up by a general who confirmed that 2 weather balloons had been released from a site near Hollywood that night. That would explain why some witnesses described the target as slow-moving, round, and completely silent. But it also raised a troubling question. If the entire thing was just 2 weather balloons, how did the U.S. military manage to fire more than 1,400 anti-aircraft shells at them and miss? A year later, in 1949, Colonel John Murphy, who had personally taken part in the investigation, published an article that added more weight to the balloon theory. He revealed that the regional controller in San Francisco had received a report of a balloon over Los Angeles, but misunderstood the message. He thought balloon meant a powered Japanese airship and immediately gave the order to open fire. The problem? He wasn't even authorized to give combat orders. That was supposed to be the sole responsibility of the air defense commander. An internal Army investigation partially backed Murphy's account, but stopped short of naming names or officially assigning blame. It was as if they'd decided, let everyone believe whatever makes them sleep at night. Still, one question refused to go away. How could trained anti-aircraft gunners unleash 1,400 shells and fail to hit even a single balloon? That's when a new angle surfaced. Maybe the balloons were drifting both vertically and horizontally, making them harder to track, and the dense smoke from the constant shelling created an optical illusion, making it look like there were multiple moving targets in the sky. Even the acting commander admitted that, at first, he thought the air was full of enemy planes, but later realized all he'd been seeing was smoke from their own guns. The likely chain of events looked something like this. A weather balloon was launched after midnight. The sighting was misinterpreted as an aerial threat. The observer gave the order to fire. In the middle of the barrage, a second balloon was released, fueling the panic. Every new shell added more smoke and confusion, creating phantom targets in the sky. And by the end of the night, there were no enemy aircraft, no attack, nothing. But even that explanation still didn't answer everything. Why did the balloons vanish from radar? If they were visible to the naked eye, why didn't command call for a ceasefire sooner? And why waste so much ammunition on something so harmless? Or was there something else in the sky that night? Something we still don't know about. That night, later nicknamed the Battle of Los Angeles, the weather balloon explanation felt less like the truth and more like an attempt to quietly close an embarrassing case at a very delicate time. But here's the thing, not everyone bought it. Sure, the balloon theory held its place as the official story throughout the 1940s. But by the 50s and 60s, its credibility started to crumble. That's when researchers and analysts began floating an entirely different theory. One that claimed this wasn't a simple radar glitch or a case of mistaken identity, but the very first open military engagement with extraterrestrial craft. The biggest piece of evidence fueling that idea? A now famous photograph published in the Los Angeles Times on February 26, 1942. It showed 8 massive searchlights converging on a single point in the night sky, and right in the middle, a mysterious, disc-shaped object. Bill Henry, the paper's reporter, wrote that the object had withstood a direct anti-aircraft barrage. But in the same article, he also suggested it could have been nothing more than a cluster of drifting balloons. That contradiction didn't bother UFO believers one bit. The photo became an icon of American journalism's connection to the flying saucer phenomenon, and many swore it was proof of a genuine alien craft. But decades later, the twist came out. The image had been altered before publication, touched up to make it print more clearly in the paper. Eventually, 3 versions surfaced. The heavily retouched one printed on February 26th, the untouched original, which was never published, and a third, also altered, released in 1945. That revelation reignited the debate and sent people digging once again for an alternate explanation. In fact, there was an earlier analysis, dated January 1st, 1942, by British radar expert Robert Watson Watt. In it, he tore apart America's West Coast early warning system, calling it woefully unreliable. The radar units were prone to false readings, the operators were undertrained, and the technology itself, primitive, barely out of its infancy in the battlefield. That swung public opinion back toward the balloon theory, painting the whole thing as nothing more than a massive human error, fueled by wartime paranoia. But all of that changed, again, in 1984. A researcher of the paranormal named Jaime Chandra received a mysterious film reel from an anonymous sender. On it were photographs of what looked like highly classified documents, including memos that directly referenced the Battle of Los Angeles. One was from Army Chief of Staff George Marshall to President Roosevelt, dated just 8 days after the incident. The Army has reached an extraordinary conclusion. The mysterious aircraft are in all probability of interplanetary origin. Another, allegedly from Roosevelt back to Marshall, spoke of atomic secrets learned from studying celestial devices and claimed the military now possessed rare materials that would be used to develop advanced new weapons. But then, the questions began. Were these documents genuine, or an elaborate, carefully crafted hoax? Did the U.S. government really cover up a public confrontation with extraterrestrials? Or was it all just a chain reaction of human mistakes at the worst possible moment in history? And maybe the biggest question of all, was that night just the result of mass hysteria? Or was it the opening chapter of something much, much bigger? If you send the next segment, I'll keep the exact same rhythm so the whole story feels like one seamless, escalating mystery. Years later, specifically in 1987, another bombshell dropped. A second set of the so-called Majestic 12 documents surfaced, this time landing in the hands of British author Timothy Good, once again from an anonymous source. His copy backed up the earlier leaks almost word for word, and he laid it all out in his best-selling book Above Top Secret. That book hit like a thunderclap. It didn't just revisit the Battle of Los Angeles. It claimed that virtually every government on Earth was deliberately hiding the truth about UFOs, even if it meant shattering their credibility with their own citizens. Exactly what had happened in Los Angeles in '42. But here's the strange part. Instead of uniting believers, the documents split them into rival camps. You had the Chandra group, swearing their copy was the real deal, and the Good group, just as adamant that theirs was the authentic version. The fight over who had the true documents became louder than the fight to prove they were real at all. The chaos eventually pulled the FBI into the fray. They launched a formal investigation and even published 24 pages of the Majestic 12 papers on their own website. Most of them were stamped in big, bold letters. Fake. Examples? One memo supposedly signed by President Truman, the signature turned out to be literally pasted on before photographing. Another memo, allegedly handwritten by presidential aide Robert Cutler, except Cutler was overseas at the time, meaning total forgery. Not long after, a new theory emerged, that all the documents were part of an intentional disinformation campaign, planted by the Air Force's Special Investigations Unit. The goal? To keep UFO enthusiasts chasing the wrong rabbit and away from real, top-secret military aircraft projects. You see, in the years after World War II, amateur plane spotters were flocking near U.S. bases, snapping long-lens photos of test flights. The military worried that somewhere among them could be Soviet spies. So the thinking was, if people claim they saw a flying saucer, no one in authority will take them seriously. Meanwhile, the real technology stays safely hidden under a cloud of mystery. And now, more than 80 years later, The Battle of Los Angeles remains one of the strangest and most hotly debated events in U.S. military history. Despite decades of analysis, witness accounts, and official investigations, there's still no single explanation that satisfies everyone. Was it a false alarm? Weather balloons? A deliberate Japanese scare tactic? Or an actual full-scale encounter with something not of this earth, covered up at the highest levels? As the Navy Secretary said back then, it was the result of fear and mass hysteria, and fear can make people see things that were never there. Most of the people who lived it are gone now, and with them, the real details of that night. In a 2011 article, one journalist summed it up perfectly. Everyone will see in this story exactly what they want to believe. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Fear can change the reality in front of you and make you believe anything. And that is the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this one, you'll love the story of the creepy disappearance of the entire town of Ashley and the mind-bending mystery of the vanishing Zanetti train. Two more stories that will leave you stunned by their twists. Until next time.